Hello Year 9s, welcome to Lesson 3 of the God and Revelation Unit, Religious Studies. Obviously it's Mr. Mayers here again, talking to you about whether God's real and stuff like that. You'll see if you've downloaded the link and you'll see if you've clicked on the link to the shared point that there are loads of videos in this lesson. It's best if you can download those and then find a way to play them on Media Player or something like that. But some of them I might play within this video and just hold the camera there because they might not be that long. But the first link anyway is really relevant for today's lesson. The lesson's about an argument for God's existence, which is called the first cause argument. And the first videos in the PowerPoint are all linked to that. So number one, there's a video about these guys have made a music video for their song. It's a pretty good song actually, I like it. And it's probably the most impressive causation sort of machine I've ever seen really. Everything knocks on to another cause and another sort of link in the chain of events, and there's barrels smashing up, umbrellas falling down, loads of tins, and then at the end when the video finishes, so if you haven't watched it already, I really recommend just pause this video and go back and watch that one. But at the end, all the sort of people and engineers that made it are all cheering, because apparently they had to film that quite a few times to get it to work, but eventually they managed to make it happen. When you do click on the link, you'll see that there's the PowerPoint here that you've hopefully opened already, and then these are all the videos that you can that you need to watch for the lesson. What I recommend is that you click here to highlight them all, and then press this download button to download them all to your desktop. You can always delete them after if they take up loads of room. Once you've got them, you can watch these videos. They're pretty nifty. This is a Guinness advert, this one, where lots of different causes are set up, and it leads on to lots of different things happening, and eventually it makes a big not going to ruin it for you, but yeah, it's good. And then the other one, it's kind of like some engineers at Honda have got some bits from a Honda Civic or something and arrange them so that they knock on and make another bolt, knock onto another bolt, and so on. And the whole point at the end of that one is that it's amazing when things come together well. So hopefully you'll see that there's kind of a connection between all of these videos that you're watching, and it's all about the fact that one thing leads on to another. One event that happens causes something else to happen, and then that event then leads on to something else. And it's with that in mind that we're going to be considering one of the most controversial, I suppose, arguments for the existence of God. Maybe even more controversial than the design argument that you learned about last lesson, because in a way the design argument is all about your perspective on the world. So some people see that the world is designed in their mind and they think, wow, that's brilliant, there's no way that could have come about without being designed. Some other people look at the world and go, nah, rubbish design, or if God made that, then God's not very good, or that it's just not designed, it's just random and chaotic. But when it comes to the first cause argument, it's an area where science has had quite a lot to play in recent years, and lots of people and famous scientists like Stephen Hawking have said things like the universe didn't need a God to have created it, and then everybody thinks, wow, science has proved that God doesn't exist. And then other philosophers and people have said that the universe couldn't have come about without some sort of creator. There must have been a creator. And so yeah, it's a really interesting argument, and it's called the first cause argument. The one that we're going to look at today is called the first cause argument. But overall, largely, these kinds of arguments are generally referred to as the cosmological arguments for the existence of God. And they're called the cosmological arguments because they're arguments for the existence of God based on a knowledge of the cosmos or the universe or the fact that there's anything here at all. Obviously, we're in the universe now, and some people believe that without some sort of creator, there wouldn't be able to be a universe for us to exist in. So the objectives of today's lesson, anyway, are firstly to understand the first cause argument, and then secondly, to be able to evaluate the argument against modern scientific ideas. For example, the Big Bang Theory is quite a well-used discussion point, really, about whether the first cause argument proves the existence of God. Some people say the Big Bang Theory proves that you don't need God as an explanation. But some people argue back and say, hey, something still had to cause the Big Bang to happen. So they still require God as an explanation. So yeah, it's really interesting. If you think about this deeply enough, it will blow your mind, and hopefully, it might hurt your head to think about some of these ideas. But that's a good thing, because it means that you're really aching your brain to try and get to the solution, which loads of people have done over the years. So I hope you find the arguments interesting. So the first argument that we're going to look at is the one that's sort of the basic one that explains the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And the one that we're going to talk about was put forward by St. Thomas Aquinas. Those are the years when he lived. And he was a medieval theologian, and he wanted to try and... He believed in God already, obviously, because he was some sort of monk. And but he said that instead of just saying, just believe in God, you've just got to, he wanted to try and use reason and rationality to justify that belief. So he came up with a series of sort of points. The first one is that everything in the universe has to have a cause. Nothing just happens all on its own. A pool ball never moves away from another one. Things just can't cause themselves to happen. Nothing moves for no reason, and there's always an event that has to precede each other event to make it happen. Then if you trace those causes back in time, like in this chain reaction picture, you'll see that if this event happened, then this one caused it, and if this event happened, then this one caused that. So everything is built on a sort of chain of causes, like what you've just seen in the videos. And then he says that, well, if you trace it all back to the beginning, you'll get to a point... That was Mr. Lee emailing me. You get to a point where there must have been one thing that began everything. And then the key question is, where did that thing come from? This is where it gets pretty complicated. Firstly, I'll just tell you that Thomas Aquinas believed that there was a first cause that started off the universe, and he named it God. And he said that God, the label God, provides the explanation for the universe coming about. And his sort of view was that the first cause had to be an eternal being, something that had no beginning or end. Otherwise, something would have just caused that thing, and then that would be the first cause. But then that would go on forever. So this depends on the idea that the universe could not have started itself. So things can't come from nothing. Okay, so a quick diagram to explain this. Imagine that you stretch out the whole of time. Past is that way, future's that way, and this is where we are now. By the way, loads of people think that time might not operate like this, but let's just go with it for now. So if there's a now, if we're around, there's someone around to be walking about and talking about whether God's real and stuff. But we are what we might call a contingent being. We come into existence, exist for a bit, and then one day die. And then we don't exist anymore. And pretty much everything is like this. So, for example, years and years ago, there weren't such things as computers. But now they've existed. Maybe one day in the future they might not exist. They might all break and we might all get better stuff or whatever. But pretty much everything has this, and every object in the universe is like that. But we weren't just, magically brought about in the universe. So the point is that something had to have happened to make us be here. We don't really like to think about what that thing is, because it involves thinking about your parents like doing naughty stuff. So let's just try and not go there for a minute, but just imagine that every object has a cause. And then eventually you might get to what the first thing that ever happened, the first thing that started off all the things. In fact, it's quite an interesting exercise to try and trace how you think this universe came about from the first thing ever. It's really interesting. I'll tell you more about that because there's a video later on that might be really useful for that. But it's interesting to try and gauge what your current understanding of it is. Trace everything back in your head. Right, where did I come from? Parents. Where did they come from? Grandparents. Right, how far back did that go? I think we evolved from apes at some point. Right, where did the apes come from? They probably evolved from lesser life. Okay, what lesser life forms were there? Like frogs and stuff, amphibious creatures. I don't know what they were called. But then they evolved from other life forms. What were they? I don't know. Most people get lost at sort of this kind of point. But where did the first single cell come from that began life? Don't really know, I don't think. But at some point, chemical elements or things became biological life. I don't really know how that happened. Maybe a biology teacher might know, but ask one. But I don't know where everything came from. But try and get to then where the planet came from. Probably a rock that got bashed into by another rock at some stage, and apparently everything came from stars, but don't quite know how all that happened. But eventually there was one thing, and I think scientists generally agree that there is this Big Bang idea of where everything came from. However, even though Thomas Aquinas didn't know about the Big Bang, he would still say that where did that come from? Where did the first ever thing happen? So one answer is that there could have been nothing and then something existed. Suddenly we had a universe. But that didn't seem to make sense to Thomas Aquinas. How can you have nothing and then a load of stuff? So that didn't make sense to him. So he came to the conclusion that one other option is it could go back for infinity. You could say, well, that's the first cause, then that thing caused that thing, that thing caused that thing, that thing caused that thing. And that could go on literally for infinity. But Thomas Aquinas believed that infinite regress wasn't really possible, because if there was always an infinite number of steps backwards to there wouldn't be a very first thing, it would just keep going literally for infinity. He believed that if that were the case, then nothing would be around now, because there'd never be a first cause to have a second or third cause, and then there'd be nothing here now. So he said that the only option was that the first cause had to have never had a beginning. So it's just always been there. And he said, well, that's the thing that we understand to be God. And this is where the concept of God is quite amazing, and it does your head in a little bit, but religious people would believe that God literally has no beginning. So God exists in that direction in the past forever and never has anything that precedes it. Nothing is before it. It's just always been there. And going in that direction always will exist into the future forever and ever. Amen. And that is, again, a tough idea to get your head around, because you're confronted with the idea that something can always exist. Something can exist literally all the time, and be everlasting. You might say, well, how's that possible? Something must have made God. No, people who believe in this argument say that nothing is before God, so nothing would have a cause. And even if the God that we sort of, learn about by reading the Bible and stuff that made Adam and Eve and things like that, even if that were created by something else, then Aquinas would just say, well, that thing that made that is then God. So the idea of God is like a universally shifting idea that sort of accounts for the fact that something must have been here, always. So, anyway, whether you believe that or not is another matter, and that's what this whole lesson's about, really. It's what we're going to be discussing. So, but the conclusion that Thomas Aquinas came to anyway was that God is the word that we give to an eternal being that must have existed, or must still exist, really, to create the universe. And the fact that there is a universe at all points to the fact that, according to him, there is also a God. A couple of key words here, infinite and eternal. Infinite sort of means limitless, or in extent or size. So imagine when you say, right, infinite, just think of it just a never-ending number. Eternal's a little bit different. It sort of means lasting or existing together. If you're interested in A-level sort of RS and philosophy, we do look into that concept quite a bit, and different philosophers have different ideas about what it means to be eternal. So for example, one philosopher says that God is eternal in a timeless way. So God's existing now and just will always exist, but sort of exists only in this time and into the future, and was always existing in the past. But some other philosophers think that God is eternal in the sense that God exists outside of time and is separate to time and doesn't really exist within this universe and is sort of outside of it. It's all very confusing, and it's a great great thing to be thinking about. But pause at this point and just think, well, what do you believe about this? What do you think? And just see, having just gone through that argument, the first cause argument, see if you can pause now and on some plain paper, just write out those steps. Just see if you can remember the different steps of thinking that Thomas Aquinas went through to come up with this argument. And see if you can explain it to somebody else, and see if you can, remember the different ways that argument argues for the existence of God. So pause now, jot down your ideas, try and explain the first cause argument. Okay, good luck with that.
60-second adventures in thought. Number 4. Hilberts Infinite Hotel. A grand hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and an infinite number of guests in those rooms. That was the idea of German mathematician David Hilbert, friend of Albert Einstein, and enemy of chambermaids the world over. To challenge our ideas about infinity, he asked what happens if someone new comes along looking for a place to stay. Hilbert's answer is to make each guest shift along one room. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, and so on. So the new guest would have a space in room 1, and the guest book would have an infinite number of complaints. But what about when a coach containing an infinite number of new guests pulls up? Surely he can't accommodate all of them. Hilbert frees up an infinite number of rooms by asking the guests to move to the room number which is double their current one, leaving the infinitely many odd numbers free. Easy for the guest in room 1, not so easy for the man in room 8,600,597. Hilbert's paradox has fascinated mathematicians, physicists and philosophers, even theologians. And they all agree you should get down early for breakfast.
That video was from a series called 60-Second Adventures in Thought, and it's by the Open University, and you can click on YouTube and look up loads of those. There's lots of different ones that really get you thinking about lots of different stuff, but don't do it yet, because we're going to focus now on what was the content of that video, which was that, does that concept of infinity or eternalness even make any sense? And like it said in the video, philosophers and mathematicians have baffled with that question endlessly to infinity. But the point is that does that idea make sense? Does the idea of infinity make sense? If you think about numbers, for example, that always used to do my head in as a kid, thinking about numbers. And when someone said, right, I've got infinity power, or I've got infinity plus 1, or I've got infinity times 2, or whatever. And it makes you just think, well, numbers are infinite, and that is just crazy. So if you imagine that someone's got, if you say to one person, right, you can have the numbers between 1 and 1,000,000, right, you've got loads of numbers there, got 1,000,000 numbers. But then someone else could say, well, I've got numbers 0 to infinity, so I've just got infinity numbers, deal with that. But then someone else could say, well, I've got the numbers minus infinity to infinity, so I've got double what the other person had, because I've got all of the same numbers they had, but all the minus versions of that number, so I've got double infinity. And someone else might say, oh, I've only got 1 to 10, or I've only got 1 to 2. But even within the numbers 1 and 2, you can have 1.5, 1.55, 1.555555, and that could go on for infinity. So even within one number, even within one decimal point, you could have an infinite amount of numbers in between. So, and then someone else could have all of those all together. But the weird thing is that they've all still got the same amount of numbers, because they've all got infinity numbers, which is the most you can get. So you can't have infinity times infinity. Or what if someone said, right, well, I'll have it infinity squared. That's infinity times infinity, even more. Or infinity to the power of infinity. Whoa, that's like the most numbers you can get. So, yeah, I did my best there to try and make numbers sound interesting. And, God help maths teachers. How do they do that? Day in, day out. But, well, good luck to them. But, forgot the point now. Oh yeah, there's some other ideas about why the concept of infinity might not make sense. Quite a popular one was to imagine you had to walk for 1 mile, but you had to do it half at each time. So before, you can't just walk the whole mile, you've got to walk half a mile and then stop. And then you've got to look at how much distance is left and think, I'm going to walk half of that. So you think, right, I've got half a mile left, I'll walk half of that. 1/4 of a mile, job done. I've got 1/4 of a mile left to go, so now I'm going to walk half of that, which is 1/8 of a mile. And then you'll keep going until maybe you've got like 1 centimetre left to walk, and you think, right, I'm going to walk half of that distance, half a centimetre, here we go. And then you walk there. And if you keep doing that, if you keep walking just half the distance, apparently you'll never get to the end. You'll never reach the destination. And again, you think, what? That's ridiculous. Of course I will. If I've only got 1/billionth of a millimetre left to walk, I'm going to be getting there really soon. But the point is, you won't, because if you only walk half of a billionth of a millimetre, then you've still got the other half of a billionth of a millimetre left to go. And then you've got to walk half of that again. Eventually you'll make a mistake and go, oh no, I've gone too far, I've got there. But in mathematical terms, you will never get there, because there's an infinite amount of points. You can never split the half so finely that you'd never actually get there. Mad. But that's, that should open up your mind to lots of other crazy questions, which are on the next slide, like, what are the problems with God being eternal? Is it possible for something to have always existed? Get on the other bit of your plain paper, jot these questions down, and see if you can write a couple of sentences in answer to each question. See if you can think of some problems with God being eternal. One of the ones for that might be people saying, well, God can't be eternal, something must have made it. What made God? But just bear in mind that religious people would say nothing needs to have made God. It's always kind of been there. Option 2 though, question 2 is, might the universe always have existed without a need for a God? That sounds like a more scientific-y sort of thing to say, like, well, maybe the universe has just always been here. And it's a good thought. And some people argue back at that by saying, well, either way, even if the universe itself has always existed, you're still brought face to face with that idea that something could have always existed. So even if you believe it's the universe that's always been here, in some ways you're still thinking that something could have always been here. So it's sort of, yeah, it's quite a spiritual idea, whether you think of it in scientific terms or religious terms. Anyway, so, and that leads on, all these questions are sort of bound up together really, but question 3 is, does the universe have to have a cause? Do you think it needed anything to kick it off? And is it reasonable for Thomas Aquinas to suggest that God is an explanation for the universe? So pause the video, write down those questions and see if you can come up with some good answers to them. And also go and speak to different people in your house and say, hey, what made the universe? Where do you think it came from? Why do you think anything is here? Because it always amazes me that some people go through their whole life never questioning these kinds of things. They never think about where the universe came from, or even if it had a cause or anything. They just literally wake up, eat breakfast, go to work every day, and then like retire and die, play dominoes for a bit and then die. And you just think, why haven't you stopped and thought about these amazing ideas? It's just madness. I believe no student should leave school without having considered these ideas, which is why I hope everybody watches this video. But yeah, pause it anyway for now and answer those questions. Good luck. At this point, what you should do is pause the video and go and watch the video clip that is called The Big Bang Theory. And that will really help you to understand the scientific approach to all of this. And I know I sometimes slate science and say, science is rubbish, it can't tell us anything. I do find it absolutely amazing that they can know things like that in the first 3 minutes, or within the first 3 minutes, protons and neutrons and electrons and neutrinos, whatever they are, all formed. But then it took another 300,000 years for hydrogen and helium to just exist, and then another 1 billion years for stars to begin to form, and stuff like that is just incredible. So yeah, what you need to now do then is, on your bits of plain paper where you've just written the cosmological argument and then you've written hopefully your answer to some of those questions, now it's time to have a look at the Big Bang Theory. So pause the video and make notes on the Big Bang Theory that you understand from the video, and I'll go through them with you in a minute. Okay, good luck with that. Bye. To give you a bit of help with this, I made some notes on the Big Bang Theory and made it really sort of as basic a summary as I think I could, just to try and explain it. Essentially, as far as I understand it, the Big Bang Theory states that all the material in the universe, so that's literally everything, was condensed into a tiny space about the size, well, I think it's smaller than the size of a pinhead. And obviously that was a very dense mass. So just to try and get your head around that a little bit, just imagine now that the stuff that is in your room that you're sat in now was put into a massive crusher and made so small that it was about 1 centimetre cubed. All the stuff would still be in that 1 centimetre cubed. Like, you know, how they get a car that's been crashed or whatever, and it goes in a big crusher and they make it the size of a washing machine, and you think, blimey, that's a car the size of a washing machine. That's unbelievable. But now imagine everything in the room that you're in squished into a little 1 centimetre cube. It'd probably still weigh the same, I think, but it'd be really dense, a really dense mass. So some things that are spread out are really light, like a bean bag. It's quite big, but you can just pick it up. But some things are like the size of a shoebox, but you wouldn't be able to pick it up, like Thor's hammer. But the point is that now imagine the whole Earth and all of the other planets and stars and galaxies all squished into a tiny space. You might think, that's not possible, but that's what science is telling us. It's based, if you don't get why, watch that Big Bang video again about how they traced it back to be a singularity. It's really interesting how they explain that. Anyway, no one really knows why, but the mass, this stuff that was the universe but the size of a pinhead, suddenly just expanded at a really fast rate. So much so that it was likened to an explosion. I think the Big Bang was actually used to ridicule the person who came up with the theory. And they said, "What, you muppet, what, you mean like there was just a Big Bang and then everything came out?" And it's interesting that now that's the sort of title of the theory, but I don't think it was called that at first, but we all know it as the Big Bang Theory now. Anyway, this expansion will continue until one day, this is debatable actually, some people believe it will begin to retract to its former state. Some say it might keep going and expanding forever, and some say it might reach a point where where it stabilizes and stays the same, presumably forever, but nobody really knows. But anyway, it's an interesting theory, and one that I think, if you have a basic understanding of it, it really helps you to sort of ponder where the universe might have come from and how it got here. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So the next thing then, the next slide says, well, while some scientists believe that the Big Bang Theory proves that the universe was not created by God, others say that the way in which the universe began actually points towards a creative force, because they say, for example, that the Big Bang had to have happened just at the right rate for it to end up as the universe that we have now. So some say that, even the Big Bang, which seems like a random chaotic explosion, needed to have some sort of planning and order and design behind it. So this is where the Big Bang Theory overlaps with the design argument. They sort of blend into each other at this point. Anyway, the final task that you've got to do then today is try and think of some ways, and you can use the internet to research this as well. On the left hand side, try and jot down some ways in which the Big Bang Theory supports the existence of God, or the idea of the existence of a creator. And then on the right hand side of a plain bit of paper, try and explain how the Big Bang Theory doesn't support the existence of God, and think about to what extent or in what way the Big Bang Theory has an impact on religious belief. And the final point really is where it says, there's a quote here, and it says, scientists have shown that the Big Bang is the first cause of the universe, so there's no need for God to explain the existence of the universe, or no need for an idea of God to explain the existence of the universe. So, in a group, or maybe you can WhatsApp. You don't use WhatsApp, do you? Maybe you can, I don't know what you use now to communicate. Is it Snapchat? Oh, I've got no idea. However it is that you talk to your pals, ask them. You're all in the same year group, so in theory you're all doing this work, I hope. Try and have a bit of a chat about what you think about this. Maybe one of you might make it into a little video. What do you think about that idea? In the class, normally we'd get them to we'd get you to film a little conversation about it, but obviously we're not going to do that. Okay, so the final task is quite an easy one really. You just click on the final slide and click on that link, and there's a scientist called, I think his name's David Christian if I remember, and he talks in 18 minutes about how the universe could have come about. So he does really blend the sort of first cause ideas about where everything came from, and sort of takes it all the way through to evolution and how humans came about to be as we are. It's really interesting. It takes 18 minutes to watch. It's like history of the whole universe in 18 minutes. It's really interesting. Finally, as well, after you watch that, just have a little ponder. Go and sit somewhere quietly and just think, where did the universe come from? What do I think about this? What are your beliefs about it? Because that's why I find this so fascinating. Nobody still knows for sure a great deal about where the universe came from. Like in the Big Bang video that you watched, ideas about what antimatter is and how big the universe is and how fast is it expanding, what's it expanding into, where did it come from. Nobody really ultimately knows the answers to all of these questions, which is why it's so interesting to talk about it. Certain recent-ish developments have made the argument even more interesting. Like he's not a philosopher, I think it's some sort of astrophysicist guy called Lawrence Krauss brought out a book a few years ago called A Universe from Nothing. And I remember going to get that book thinking, yes, I'm going to finally understand how the universe could have come about from nothing. And then, the first cause argument will be solved. And then I read it and he said something like, I'm trying to summarize the whole book now in about one sentence, but he said something like, all the stuff that's in the universe, the aggregate of it all is zero. So there's essentially nothing in the universe, but then there was some ways in which the universe sort of existed, even though there was nothing in it, where it could come two different ways, so that some stuff could come into existence and some stuff would sort of be like antimatter, or I think they call it dark matter. And probably getting this all wrong, but he was kind of saying that even if there's nothing there, matter could come about from nothingness, essentially. But given the conditions of the universe. But the book, in my mind, never really got to the overall question, which is, where do those pre-existing conditions of the universe come from that can make it so that stuff could come out of nothing? And then it made me just think, wow, we're just going around in circles. We'll never get to the ultimate sort of understanding of the universe, or will we? I don't know. But so yeah, that's why it's such an interesting question. What do you think about it? Maybe have a discussion with your friends, and if you're really fed up, talk about that. But right, I'm going to get going now anyway. Good lesson, well done if you did all that work, and I'll speak to you soon next time. I can't remember what next lesson's about. Oh yeah, it's about religious experiences, and when people have them, does that mean that God exists? Because people say they've seen God. So another interesting topic to look forward to in a couple of weeks' time. Right, see you soon, bye.